sponsoring this event. Thanks, Jack. Quantum Curious by Nathan was also a sponsor. And then we have Blue Chapter Professional Law Corporation, also sponsoring. Okay. Again, also we have other collaborators. So outside Oxford, we have Washington, D.C. Quantum Computing, London Quantum Computing Meetup, Portland, and Bay Area. And inside Oxford, thanks to Physics Society and the AI Society.
Hello everyone. So as Mo just explained, I'm the events manager. So it falls upon me to tell you a bit about the society and what we do and the kind of events we do. So if you can see here, we try to keep a good balance between industry and academia. As you can see, we've had some great speakers, including the man himself, David Deutsch. And we had a few industry speakers last term with Atom Computing and Fidelity. And by joining us, you are looking at learning for beginners and interacting with these great speakers, including taking part in hackathons and getting to be a part of that community where our members do flash talks, talk about their research and all that. Just to give you a brief about what we have upcoming is we have a quantum communications panel upcoming on 16th November, where we're talking with Quantum Dice, an Oxford-based startup, with BT about their quantum information exchange protocols. And we also have a fun quantum chess tournament coming up, so sign up for that. Okay, about today's event. So in terms of sheer size, this is the biggest event we've ever attempted. We had members from across almost every continent, apart from Antarctica for obvious reasons. And if you look at it, we had 817 attendees, which is a record breaker for any university in any quantum event, so thank you, Jack, for that. And if you look at it, we have a really good mix of the kind of people and the backgrounds in quantum, including people who are really curious and do not have much idea about the field, and a few professionals who know exactly what they're doing. So, to talk about now, I'll let Mo introduce Jack a bit.
Yeah, again, we're lucky to have Jack here joining us. Jack is a serial entrepreneur. He's actually a trained neuroscientist. Yes. But he taught himself quantum mechanics and quantum computing. He has a book on quantum computing. As we advertised, the first 30 people who showed up here today will get a signed copy. And now he is leading Sandbox AQ. So you have the floor, Jack. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm Jack Hidary, and my team will be helping to discuss all the issues today. I want to thank Mert, Vanch, Nathan for a great organization. Please, a big shout out to all the organizers. It's great to be back here at Oxford. We were here just before COVID and have not been able to come back until right now, so it's wonderful to be back in person, and it's great to have this direct interaction. Yeah, is that good? Oop. I think you have to start it over first. Okay, no problem. And today we're going to keep it very informal, so I'll be describing some of the AQ technologies and sciences. I'll be bringing in a number of members of my team, my senior team here are with me, and talk about these different areas. One of the goals is really to think about your career, both here in academia and then beyond academia. What kind of things do you want to study? What kind of subjects do you want to pursue? What are the implications of AQ technology for the different sectors of our economy, for science itself? And we're going to be going through that today. We'd love to have questions, so start preparing your questions. If we don't have questions, I'm going to be calling on you first, and then you. Okay? And no, but we'd love to hear questions. Also, we're going to hear questions, I believe, from the online chat as well. Benji is here to start fielding questions from online. So if you're watching us on video right now, online, please prepare your questions. Put them in the chat on the Zoom channel, and we'll be calling up questions from that as well. Great. All right. Get a little good. Okay, good. Let's see. Great. Okay, good. Let's see if this works. Ooh. Okay. I always get excited when I see that. So of course we're here at Oxford, and a lot of critical milestones happen right here at this university in the history of quantum computing. I think people are generally familiar with David's work, and it's wonderful that his contributions are now being recognized through the Breakthrough Fundamental Prize and other prizes as well. Let's see if this is, it wasn't that simple. Yeah, okay, good. We're back on track. And one of the things that is less well known about David's work is that he actually anticipated the breaking of RSA in one of his books, written in 1997. So that was pretty early to recognize. Of course, Peter Shor wrote his paper already, but in terms of a book that popularized that information, this is one of the first books that got that message out to a more popular audience, that Shor's algorithm would one day break that. But he also was anticipating store now, decrypt later. The fact that even though today, and certainly back then, we didn't have quantum computers that could break commercial grade, government grade RSA in terms of the keys that we use. However, store now, decrypt later means that you can grab information from the internet as people are trying to transmit with public key cryptography, or break into people's computers and grab encrypted information, store it for the year that you can then decrypt it with a sufficiently sized quantum computer. So already anticipating SNDL, and we have a paper that we've handed out here physically, but on your screens at home and here in the audience, if you just take a picture of that QR code, you can get the PDF version of this paper that we published in Nature. And this paper is an outline and a roadmap for how we will transition as a society from today's RSA ECC-based encryption methods to the post-RSA world. So we'll talk more about that coming up. And at the end, I'll ask Kelly Witchell of our team to talk about our residency program. And this is a program for students who are pursuing various degrees here at Oxford and around the world to come and learn with us as well. And so we co-train students with about 40 universities around the world, including Oxford, but many others in many countries. And we look forward to working with you that are here in the audience and online to continue your studies and research with us at Sandbox AQ alongside the university. Today we're going to talk about AQ, AI and quantum. And so I think most of us have some sense of what AI is about, but quantum really is a very broad science. Quantum information sciences, it's not just quantum computers. I know that gets most of the headlines, but quantum information sciences is far bigger than that, and it includes all kinds of communications and sensing. We'll get to that. And it really involves a lot of different disciplines. And that's one of the challenges that the field has had, is that it does not really sit just in one department. Yes, you need physicists for a lot of quantum stuff, but we need many, many other specialties coming in. And beyond these specialties, of course, those interested in business and other areas are critical to making these a reality and bringing these products out to market as well. Quantum has now moved very much from just a lab right into the marketplace, and so everyone can have a role to play. You do not have to have a PhD in quantum to get into this field. So that's one of the messages we want to share with you today. It's great if you do have a PhD or getting a PhD, wonderful, fantastic, but you can still enter this field from many, many different approaches. And so I do want to emphasize that as well. Where did we come from? We started our organization inside of Alphabet, inside of Google, and we built this starting in 2016 when we realized there was a lot to do in solving the world's hardest problems in drug discovery, in cybersecurity, and other key areas using AI and quantum. And we built it up, put out books and papers. Eric Schmidt joined us 2020 when he wrapped up his chairmanship of Google and Alphabet. He then joined us as our key senior advisor. We then published papers on quantum chemistry and other areas, came out with the paper that you have in your hands now and online, and then spun out of Alphabet earlier this year, March 2022. We spun out of Alphabet to become an independent company with Eric Schmidt as the chairman, myself as CEO, and our wonderful team spun out, and now we've actually quadrupled in size since March of this year, because there's so much to do in addressing these global issues, addressing climate change, addressing drug discovery, addressing cybersecurity, addressing medical imaging. These are the core areas that Sandbox AQ does work in. And it's only the convergence of AI and quantum that allows us to get to these major challenges. I think Eric sums it up best in this quote about this convergence. And these are some of the areas that we focus on at the company. So let me just jump first into the AI revolution. I think everyone's familiar with the general principles, but the rise of the new GPUs has really had a major impact on this field. And of course, GPUs were first used for what application? Any guesses from the audience here? I'll take guesses. The G in GPU is games, right. So graphics, processing units for games, video game processing. Back in the day, they looked quite bitmappy, and now they look have much more beautiful rendering because of these GPUs. That was the initial impetus for making these chips. But things have really progressed quite a bit. All these different companies and many, many more have now created their own versions of these GPUs. And look at just one company here, NVIDIA. NVIDIA stock, I hope everyone here has shares in NVIDIA. Yes? No? Not yet? Okay. NVIDIA stock has tracked the different applications. So back a number of years ago, it was mainly just used for video games. It was a company that had about a $30–40 billion market capitalization, NVIDIA. But as people realized that we can now use this in other applications, such as deep learning, NVIDIA's market cap started to rise, and it's done very well. There's been a bit of a correction, obviously, in the last 2–3 months, but even so, it's still a very valuable company at about $340 billion of market capitalization, even after the recent downturn. So that's just an indication of the value here. And you can see this progression from gaming to the cards, and then the NVIDIA Teslas, which is very confusing because Tesla, the company, has the D1 chip, but NVIDIA has the Tesla chip, so it's a bit confusing. But on the upper left, we have a video game. Anyone guesses what video game that is? Any crazy gamers here? Doom, yes, okay. So Doom, when we were kids, looked like that on the upper left. Now it looks like the one just below it. And then, of course, neural networks. And now a third area for GPUs is high-dimensional simulation. We can simulate molecular interactions, but also, if you're going into finance or banking, you may want to simulate a portfolio and optimize that portfolio. So a lot of applications in the sciences, but also in industry as well. And of course, we know the principles of neural networks were inspired by the brain itself. The brain, comprised of 86 to 100 billion neurons with trillions and trillions of connections, inspired us in the neural network field to create these kinds of networks. We see on the left the biological version of a neuron, and on the right, the very simplistic. Artificial neurons are actually quite simplistic compared to the ones in our brain. The ones in our brain with many ion channels and all kinds of interesting features are far more complex than the ones we have in these kind of neural networks. Yet, by combining millions and millions and millions, and now billions of these, we've achieved great milestones in this area. And what we can see is because of the rise of GPUs, we've gone from just a billion or so of these artificial neurons to 20 to 100 to 100, now to 540 billion artificial neurons in the most recent large language models. And so, please, Francis. And it's nonlinear in its effect. So it was hard, actually, for most people to see, even just 2–3 years ago, how complicated these neural networks would be and how powerful they'd become. Because now, with just in the last 6–7 months, with the most recent GPUs from all the companies that I just mentioned earlier, we're now achieving far greater scale. My prediction to you today, right here in this lecture, is that we're just around the corner from the first trillion node network. So we just achieved 540 billion in the field just in the last few months, and that took many, many years to get from 1 billion to 540 billion. To get to a trillion will not take that long. And in fact, the first GPUs that can handle trillion node computation are just around the corner. And as we go forward, we'll now have to discover what we can do with these kinds of things. We have, of course, not only the text-based large language models, but also multimodal, visual learning models, and now even video. Just in the last 6 weeks, we're seeing the rise of a number of offerings out there from both companies as well as the open source community in video games. You give one prompt, and bingo, you have a whole video that is displayed. Now, you can imagine the implications of this. First, for scientific visualization, let's say you're taking a course in chemistry, you want to visualize two atoms interacting, you can ask and prompt it to give you a visualization and then share that with your peers. Or if you're teaching a course, you can do that as well. And so a lot we can do with video. You can imagine also for the content industry, if you're creating video content, you can now do that. And we can only imagine what kind of cartoons and shows will be created by AI. What's interesting is that as you do prompts to different of these visual learning models, you get different outputs. So the prompt of astronaut on a horse gives different output from different of these models. And that's going to be an interesting area. We call this emerging field prompt engineering. So the prompts are the words that you type in to get an image out, and the engineering of it is understanding the particularities of that particular model. And so some models like Midjourney, has anyone tried here Midjourney yet? Okay, one person has tried Midjourney. I really encourage everyone, right after this lecture, not during the lecture, but right after the lecture, to try Midjourney. It's open and people can get accounts on it. And Midjourney is particularly good at architecture. So if you're interested in creating beautiful scapes and futuristic architectures, Midjourney is doing a beautiful job there. Does many other things as well. Of course, there's DALL-E 2, there's Stable Diffusion, and by the time this lecture is over, I'm sure yet another visual learning model will be launched during the time of this session. Here's the video that we can see here. So a prompt of showing us a mountain, zooming in on it, bingo, produces an entire video there. And then, of course, we have auto machine learning. So they're getting so complicated now, these models. How does a human choose and tune the hyperparameters of these models? Today, creating neural networks and fine-tuning them is mainly a shamanistic practice. It's a priesthood that those of us who've been doing it for many years, we know how to tune these hyperparameters. And hyperparameters are the variables that we can change, such as learning rate, number of hidden layers, number of nodes per hidden layer, width, so on and so forth. We have about 15 or so key hyperparameters that we typically tune to get convergence, to get great generalization for our neural network. And today it's mainly, as I mentioned, kind of an art more than a science. And a lot of work is being done right now to think about how to actually choose the right set of hyperparameters. And so this field of NAS has emerged. Any ideas what NAS stands for? You're allowed to use Google to find out what NAS is. Neural architecture search, exactly. So neural architecture search is a whole field of research here at Oxford and many other universities around the world of how do you have a meta AI, another AI that automatically searches the landscape of possible hyperparameter settings to get to the best model for the data or the challenge that you have. And this is a fascinating field because this is what we need to scale AI across many, many different models. It's called AutoML by many different offerings out there. If you go to most of the cloud providers today, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, they all have offerings today in AutoML. And so this allows non-specialists to start to use advanced AI as well. That's why AutoML is so powerful and allows many companies to take advantage of this. So that's the AI side. We talked about the rise of GPU. We talked about the insight that a brain-inspired model of neural network can be very, very powerful. And the last 6 months, in particular, has been a golden age, a revolution in terms of the natural language processing models, the large language models, as well as visual models, and now even video models as well. Now let's turn to quantum a bit. So where do we stand today? Well, here in England and the continent of Europe, about 30 individuals back from 1900 to 1930s basically realized that we needed a new framework in physics to handle the data that was coming out of the experiments. These experiments, starting in 1860 actually, moving through 1880, 1890s, really confounded the physics of the time. There were 5 major crises, and I know people can feel the crisis even till today, of the data that was coming out that really said that the physics of the time could not be complete. And so, sure enough, Max Planck and many others, including Paul Dirac here in the UK, came up with a new theory of how things worked. And it's not just at the small level. I know that it's a common perception that quantum is for the very tiny, for the small levels. Actually, we can see quantum effects at the cosmological scale as well. It's not the subject of today's lecture, unfortunately, so maybe I'll come back another day and we'll talk about quantum at the cosmological scale. But it is not just for the small, it's also for very large effects as well. In any case, in the 50s and to 70s, we had the first applied quantum revolution. Here in the UK, on the continent, in the US, we had many, many different applied physicists take the principles of quantum and then make products out of them. And examples are the MRI machine. The MRI is a quantum sensor. It's a quantum principle that operates in an MRI machine, and it was created by physicians and quantum scientists. The laser pointer, a laser, is created by a quantum physicist and is a quantum device. And the transistor, of course, created by 3 quantum physicists at Bell Labs, could not exist without our understanding of band gaps and semiconductors from a quantum point of view. So we are all beneficiaries, and all of us right now in our hands are using quantum-based devices, although they're not quantum computers. We're going to talk about the difference in just a few moments. And then, of course, now, in the last 3 years, we're in the 3rd revolution, and this is also an applied revolution where we're talking about now the areas that we discussed earlier of quantum security, quantum communications, quantum simulation, and quantum sensing. And so a quantum computer is different than just a transistor-based or bit-based computer in that, yes, a laptop that we all have here, our phones, are using quantum principles and how we created and understand transistors and the effect that they leverage. But they're not leveraging quantum mechanical principles to do the computation itself. And so that's really where we now have the ideas that David Deutsch, Richard Feynman, and Paul Benioff. Paul Benioff just recently passed away earlier this year, and although it's often credited to Richard Feynman as the initiator of the ideas of quantum computing, actually, Paul Benioff beat him by a year in terms of his paper that described the principles of quantum computing, but often doesn't get named. So in the book, I make clear that Paul Benioff actually is the one who actually put out one of the first papers ever to really describe what a quantum computer is. But we do give credit to Richard Feynman, given his notoriety at the time for popularizing the idea and for getting that word out. In fact, quantum now is becoming such a big field that the investment in it today, both by government, public sector, and venture capital, private sector, is 5 times the rate at which AI was just about 2013, 2014. That was the year before AI really took off in terms of what it can do in industry and in science as well. And does anyone recall what happened in the year 2014, 2015? What did AI do that was surprising? Any thoughts about the contest that it won?
AlphaGo?
AlphaGo was later, but thank you for that. AlphaGo was later. This was a visual learning task where you had to look at millions and millions of images and say that's a car, that's a boat, that's a sailboat, and so on and so forth. This contest was run for many, many years, and there was incremental improvement over time. And then suddenly Jeff Hinton, out of Canada, out of CIFAR, the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research, and University of Toronto, he and his team entered into that competition and blew the field away. And instead of just having single-digit improvements, had double-digit improvements over the previous contestants, and that was because of the use of deep learning. Rather than the old methodologies that we had before, it was the use of this distributed nodal network that was at the margins of computer science for years. We call that the AI winter. And in another time, we'll talk about why that AI winter occurred, but in any case, global investment started increasing rapidly, and now we're seeing the same thing in quantum as well. So now let me turn to one of my colleagues to describe the main ways that we build these quantum computers, the pros and the cons, and she'll spend just a few minutes talking about that. But first, maybe also some intro as to who you are as well. Here's your microphone. Please welcome Nadia Carlson. Nadia.
Great to be here with you today. Thanks, Jack. So my name is Nadia Carlson. I'm VP of Product at SandboxAQ. I started at Sandbox 6 months ago, and it's been just a really exciting ride in the last 6 months. Before that, I was at Amazon for 3 years. I was the head of product for the AWS Center for Quantum Computing. 2 things that I did at Amazon. One of them was launching Amazon Bracket, which is the AWS service for quantum computation, integrating different types of quantum computers, as well as leading product for the Amazon fault-tolerant quantum computer that they're building.
And before that, you got a PhD.
Before that, I got a PhD in engineering, and before that, my undergrad was in physics. I feel like nobody gets to quantum in the same way, and my path definitely was not linear. I didn't think that I would be getting to quantum after I got my PhD. I actually took a little detour through business. I was doing emerging tech consulting and investment. But the background in physics and engineering definitely has been very helpful. So it's nice to actually be able to put it to use, especially with Sandbox having such a broad portfolio of quantum technologies. So that's been really nice. So just to talk about quantum computing modalities, there's quite a few, and that's because many different companies and groups are approaching quantum computation from different perspectives and different angles. That's actually something that's really good for the field right now. It's a little bit too early to converge on a single modality because they all have trade-offs, they all have pros and cons. So actually, it's really nice that there's different types of R&D being done on these different modalities. And companies are also jumping in to commercialize these different types of technologies. There's investments in the field from VC-backed startups, but also from large companies like Google, Amazon, which is not showing up here, but should be in the superconducting category, as well as Microsoft. So big tech is definitely getting into quantum, and there's a lot of the startups as well. Mostly focusing on these 5 different modalities. There are more, and I think I'll talk about a couple more. But no single one is good at everything. If you take one key takeaway, that should be it. The reason why there is a lot of investment in different parts of quantum computing is because the field has not converged on a single best quantum computer that is good at everything. So in terms of the timeline for quantum computing is not actually a new concept. I mean, this started in the 1980s. What really spurred it was in 1994, though, when Peter Shor published his algorithm that really got a lot of people thinking about the applications of quantum computing and kind of got the field thinking about applications more than just building these theoretical devices. The first quantum computer was only 2 qubits, and that was in 1998. And a little bit more than 10 years after that, the largest quantum computer was Google's, which was able to do some security experiments with 53 qubits. And that was really a breakthrough in the field. It's hard to believe that that was only 3 years ago, because a lot has happened in the quantum computing field since then. And actually, since 2019, the devices have gotten larger. They've become better in some ways in terms of fidelity. In 2021, China built a 60-qubit quantum computer, and now in 2022, IBM has a 127-qubit quantum computer that is also available. So the pace of innovation and the pace of acceleration for the size of quantum computers has also really been amazing to see. We're still, though, even with all those improvements, in something called the NISQ era. The reason it's called NISQ, one, noisy. Well, we call it noisy because of the error rates that are involved in quantum computation. Quantum computers interact with their environments. That's what noise means. It's anything that is going to make your system decohere and spoil your computation. Intermediate scale refers to the size of quantum computer, not the physical size, but size in terms of number of qubits. And that's still, even with 127, IBM's largest processor, that is way too small to do any sort of practical computation. So what we're looking for in terms of doing something very useful in computation is having a combination of a large enough number of qubits, and that those qubits are good enough quality to do computation so that they're not decoherent in the middle and you still get a good result. So we're not quite there yet, which is why we're still in the NISQ era. NISQ era is still very useful, though, in exploring those different modalities of quantum computers, and certainly something that is very useful in terms of learning how to program quantum computers. That's something that's going to remain relatively similar as we progress to the next era of quantum. And the next era of quantum is error-corrected quantum computers. So the idea with error correction is to detect and correct for the errors that are usually happening during quantum computation so that you can actually get a calculation that is useful at the end. This is something that a lot of companies are working on. There are different ways to do error correction. If any of you are interested in kind of the more theoretical side of quantum computing, if you come to it from an algorithm and mathematical background, it's actually a fascinating area. And there's a lot of really good publications that have come in that field just in the last 2 years. And then beyond that, once we get good error-corrected quantum computers, of course, one will not be enough. There's going to be engineering challenges to scaling those quantum computers. So one of the logical things to try to do is to try to connect multiple quantum computers together, and that's where that idea of the quantum internet, the quantum communications between different quantum computers is going to become very important, and that comes with its own scientific and engineering challenges, and that's going to be key in the next 10 years. So I'll go in a little bit more details about some of these modalities. Probably the one that you're most familiar with is superconducting qubits. This is, I think, the most popular for a lot of companies. So IBM, Rigetti, for example, Amazon are all using superconducting qubits. The concept of superconducting qubits is relatively simple. So there are two main ways that you can think about building a qubit. One of them is to try to use something from nature, and one of them is try to construct something from engineering concepts that we know. And superconducting qubits are in that latter category. So what you're doing with a superconducting qubit is you're basically building an electrical circuit. And that's something that we know how to do very well. That's something that the semiconductor industry has been doing for many, many years. And that's one of the reasons that superconducting qubits are popular, is that they leverage a lot of the same techniques. What makes superconducting qubits, though, is the introduction of something called the Josephson junction. And that's what makes a qubit by introducing nonlinearity in that circuit. And that allows us to use it as a qubit because of that difference in energy levels. Where the innovation is happening in superconducting quantum computers, a lot of it has to do with the architecture of superconducting qubits. So I mentioned they're relatively easy to fabricate. We know how to do that very well. But there's a lot of innovation on what that architecture can be like. So you can put more electrical components between different qubits. You can control them in different ways. And different companies are doing this in different ways. IBM is focusing on the fixed frequency transpond, for example, whereas Rigetti is using a lot of tunable components on their devices, and that all gives them different properties and different pros and cons. So there's a lot of research there. Okay, thank you. Yeah, 2 minutes, okay. This is what a superconducting quantum computer looks like. One of the things I want to mention, because this is a pet peeve of mine, a lot of people think that is the computer. That's actually a dilution refrigerator. The computer is a tiny part at the bottom of the dilution refrigerator. And usually in real life, you'd also have big racks of electronics around it, and that's what allows you to control the system. But when people think of a quantum computer, this is what they think about, just because it's so popular and easy to show. Ion traps, a lot less easy to show, because they are a lot of optical components. Here we're using something from nature. So we're using an atom that has been charged as an ion, and we're using that as the basis for qubits. There's different states that you can use for the actual qubit. You can use hyperfine or optical transitions. You can also use different types of ions, and some of the latest research from Honeywell now, Quantinuum, as well as IonQ, are using different species of ions. So a lot of innovation is in controlling the different types of ions efficiently, as well as moving them around the chips in a way that's efficient. So you can use these optical traps in different ways for the computation. The third one is neutral atom, which is similar to ion trap in that you're also using a lot of optics in your setup. But here what's interesting is you can actually trap large arrays of atoms and use them in different ways. So you can, in addition to try to do digital computation, use them in something called the analog mode, where you are directly manipulating the Hamiltonian. And this is very interesting because you can do different types of problems in a way that's more efficient than some of the other NISC devices that I just talked about. This is what some of the neutral atom arrays can look like. The key here is how well you can control these different lattices, hence why you can do very cool things like have an Eiffel Tower made out of neutral ions. But how you manipulate these and the control that you have as you're moving the atoms is really what's going to give you the best precision over your calculations. And companies companies like Pascal and Qera and Poltquana are all working on how to do this better, as well as creating larger and larger arrays of neutral atoms. Photonics is also a very interesting platform for quantum computing. Here, one of the advantages is also that you're creating very well-known processing techniques for creating these components. Photons are also very nice in that they operate at room temperature. You don't have to worry about dilution refrigerators. One of the roadblocks is creating consistent and high-fidelity photons, as well as being able to detect them with very high precision. So that's critical to performance. Xanadu doing great work there. PsiQuantum also working on a photonic quantum computer. So a lot of great research also in this field. And I should mention, anybody working in optics would be very much at home working on a photonic quantum computer. So if that's something that's interesting to you, you should definitely look at that. Finally, spin qubits, again, leveraging processing techniques is one of the main advantages. One of the things to note is that very recently, a few months ago, there was actually a demonstration from a group at Delft, along with some US researchers, showing that they were able to use conventional fabrication techniques to create spin qubits, and that's really one of the main breakthroughs, I think, in spin qubits, because it demonstrates the fact that you can build these things in a conventional foundry at some point, which would be a game changer in terms of fabrication. Right now, one of the main roadblocks is the yield of qubits, and so this could really revolutionize the field. Finally, topological quantum computers. This is something that's a little bit more exotic than any of the qubits that I just showed. Mostly in the R&D stage right now. There is no commercial computer that uses topological qubits, but it's an area that Microsoft has invested very heavily in. And from a scientific standpoint, definitely something that is very interesting to look at. And the idea, if we're able to demonstrate this as a field, is that these computers would have error correction built in. It's actually intrinsic in the qubit. So of course it would be very appealing because we wouldn't have to do all of the error corrections that we have to do in the other modes of quantum. So with that, I'll pass it back to Jeff.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you very much. That was an expert overview of the many ways to build a quantum computer. As you can see, they're quite different. Each one had pros and cons, and I encourage everyone to investigate these different modalities. Let's now jump to another part of quantum technology that does not get as much attention as quantum computing, that is quantum sensing. And for time reasons, I'll really compress this a little bit. I'm going to ask Stefan, one of our other senior leaders, to join me in quantum sensing, and then we'll talk about quantum cryptography, quantum cybersecurity, and then wrap up with some different ways that we could all work together. So quantum sensors. The very fact that Nigel was talking about, which is it's very hard to keep coherence in these qubits, that is to keep these qubits in a state of either superposition, entanglement, so on and so forth, makes them actually really good sensors. So we flip the script. We say, you know what, instead of trying to protect it with magnetic shields by cryoprotecting it, so on and so forth, let's actually expose the qubit to the world. And if it's a magnetic field, for example, that perturbates it, fine. Let that happen, and we'll then measure the magnetic field. So rather than becoming computation, now we're talking about sensing. Same basic principles, but we've now flipped the script and actually made the bug the feature. And so how can we do these kinds of things? I'll kick off, and I'll ask Stefan to take a few minutes into some of the applications. This is one type of quantum sensor. There's many ways to build quantum sensors, but NV sensors in Diamond, in Nigel's presentation, we did not necessarily focus on NV sensors as computational units, although you can build such a computer. And NVs, I should also mention, are also critical for quantum secure communication. So this is a triple threat type of technology: computing, communications, and sensing. But today we'll focus on NVs as sensors. And here we have a carbon lattice, a diamond type of setup. And instead of carbon being in that position there, we've now replaced it with a nitrogen. And we've also left a space or a vacancy. So we call these NV centers in Diamond. And you can see here green light, 532 nanometer light, being pumped into this little cube of Diamond sensor. And then we're lifting those particular electrons in the defect to a higher quantum state, with then letting them relax back down to a ground state, in which case they have to now release photons. We can pick up those photons, and those photons, through the Zeeman effect, will actually have a signature relevant to the magnetic field that the diamond is in. This becomes the most sensitive magnetometer on Earth today. We can achieve regimes of 10 to the minus 12 Tesla in terms of the kind of magnetic fields that we can pick up. These are very, very weak magnetic fields. And let me ask now Stefan to come and join us. Please welcome Stefan Leichenauer.
All right, thanks, Jack. Hi everyone, Stefan Leichenauer. I'm the VP of Engineering at Sandbox. Just two sentences about myself. So I joined Sandbox back in 2018 after spending several years as a physicist. So I came from physics, but despite being a physicist, I had to learn all this stuff about quantum technologies as I joined Sandbox and over the years. And back when I was in school, none of this was developed. So it's sort of a continual learning process, and coming at it from all kinds of different angles. The physics angle, the computer science angle, there's AI, everything is all super important and a big part of what we all have to do together. So just to talk about some of the applications of quantum sensors. I mean, there are many applications of quantum sensors. So and this is an incomplete list. I'll just mention a couple of them. Focusing mostly on, I'll say a few words about some medical applications and some navigation-based applications. And then there are also some cybersecurity applications among many others. So as an example, just thinking about medical for a second. So Jack mentioned, in both of these cases actually, medical and navigation, the sort of subject of interest is the magnetic field, right? Jack mentioned magnetic fields as like a thing that perturbs quantum systems. Let's see if we can measure those things. So in the case of navigation, there's the magnetic field of the Earth that we're all used to, compass points north, right? But on top of that, there are very tiny differences going from place to place. And actually, it's almost like a fingerprint of your location on the Earth if you knew the magnetic field to high enough accuracy. And a quantum sensor, together with denoising software that makes use of AI, can read off those tiny changes in the magnetic field as you move from place to place and recognize where you are. Okay, and this is a way to navigate, say, without having GPS signal and things like that.
Question from the audience.
Yes.
Why can't we just use GPS? Why do we need this?
Well, I mean, GPS is great.
We play
when you
multiple
have it.
roles here.
GPS is great when you have it, but I think I wandering around Oxford, I was losing connection to my phone all the time, and so actually it would have been really nice to have some non-GPS navigation, even just here today. But then there's also like underground, underwater, all kinds of situations where GPS may not be so reliable. And so if you had something completely self-contained, where you didn't need to communicate with the outside world at all, then it could be, at the very least, a backup to something like GPS. Very, very, very useful. Like, there's a cartoon here of a cargo ship, and cargo ships, it's a big problem for them if they start to lose their navigation capabilities even a little bit. Time is money. So in the medical space, things like quantum sensing, old school quantum sensing, has been used for a long time. Things like MRI machines, for example, are quantum sensors, but they were invented back in the 70s and are extremely useful. But they're also really expensive, really big. They require special training and a special room that they have to operate in, and you have to be very careful about taking metal near them, stuff like that. But the new generation of quantum sensors, one of the themes is miniaturization of these kinds of old, bulky kinds of quantum sensors. And so, for example, magnetic imaging of different sources of magnetic fields in your body, like your brain, like your heart, like the various muscles, are a new kind of medical imagery that will be coming online over the next several years, right? The revolution is here today. And so, for example, cardiovascular disease, as an example, is a big problem. And it's known, using machines the size of rooms, like similar in spirit to MRI machines. It's known that if you could read off magnetic signals from the heart, it would give you information complementary to like EKG, which is the electric signal, the kind of information that could detect heart attacks that would otherwise be very difficult to detect, things like that. And so it's a known problem, and these kinds of new sensitive magnetic quantum sensors, for example, that don't require large rooms, could be run on every patient, could make a big impact on these kinds of issues. So that's, I don't know, I think that's quantum sensing.
Great. Thank you, sir. Quantum sensing in record time, no less. Wonderful. So you've heard about, from Nadia about quantum computing. You've heard from Stefan about quantum sensing. Now let's talk about the third area, quantum molecular simulation. Let's talk about drug discovery. Drugs today take a long time to develop, but they are very, very costly, and you can expect failure at the end. That's most likely what happens. 2/3 plus of trials fail, and overall about 87% fail through the 3 different phases of trials. And so if we had the ability to simulate and permute that molecular structure billions and billions of times and make small changes in every permutation, we could speed up the process but also lower the risk that it would fail in the final stages of clinical trial. And so there's a lot of applications if we could simulate nature, and this is again going back to Paul Van Eyck, going back to Richard Feynman's initial idea. Richard Feynman in his initial speech in 1980 said, "Nature is not classical data." That was his quote. And what he means by that is that if you want to simulate nature, you cannot use just classical computers. You ultimately have to think about quantum processes. And that's what now we can do with quantum molecular simulation, either on the left side with pharmaceuticals, but also, of course, when it comes to material science. One of the applications not on this slide is battery chemistry. And so the chemistry we use today in a Tesla or other EVs is what? What kind of chemistry? What is it known as? Ideas from the audience? Or from my staff? Okay. Lithium ion. Yeah, so lithium ion is how we do things today, but lithium ion is not scalable to the billions of cars that ultimately we need, and certainly not scalable to even greater number of billions of batteries we need in buildings like this. If there was a stationary battery in a building like this, what could we do with that? We could store electrons at nighttime when electrons are cheaply produced and actually mostly wasted. In the United States, we actually throw away 40% of the electrons we create at night. These generation plants that we have, they don't have any on-off switches. They keep going all the time. And so at night, when we're sleeping, not using as much electricity, we throw away 40% of those electrons. Instead, we can store them in batteries and then use them by day during peak times rather than drawing from the grid, thus lowering demand and helping with the aim towards climate change issues. And so to do that, we have to move beyond lithium ion chemistry. There's many issues. If we have time later, we'll talk about those issues. But if we can do that, that would be very, very, very useful. So that's quantum simulation. Now let me just finish up with quantum cybersecurity. And we talked about Peter Shor and his paper from '94, making it clear that RSA, elliptic curve, and other encryption that we use today is going to fall. And so here is the way that we do, let me see, symmetric key encryption is what has been around for thousands of years. If I want to communicate with Nico over there, and I want to have a secure communication, what we would do many, many years ago, including thousands of years ago, is we would meet first and have an agreement that on Tuesday we're going to use this key, and he has the same key and I have the same key, and we're going to use that to encrypt, and the same key to decrypt. That's why we call it symmetric key encryption, because the same key is used. However, that is not practical if you want to do something like a global economy. If you want to buy something on an e-commerce website and you want to upload your credit card, do you want to fly to Seattle and visit with Jeff Bezos and give him your credit card in person? Does somebody want to do that? No, not really. Okay, it's a bit of a pain to do that with e-commerce. E-commerce would not exist. The global financial system would not exist if we had to meet in secret in a bunker every time we wanted to exchange confidential information. And so that's where the rise of public key cryptography came about. And actually we now know, years and years later, that some of the initial ideas of public key cryptography were invented by GCHQ, right here in the UK. it was secret, unfortunately, so no one knew about it. But years later, now we know, in 1997 it was revealed that years before that, back in the early 70s, that some researchers at GCHQ actually independently came up with some of the ideas, just as our SNA, Ravesh, Shamir, and Edelman were coming up with their ideas as well. And so public key cryptography has transformed the globe. The reason why we have a global economy is in part due to public key cryptography. But one of the ways of doing public key cryptography is with RSA or elliptic curve. And unfortunately, those methodologies will fall under scaled quantum computation because of Shor's algorithm. And that is why asymmetric key public key cryptography is at high risk. Symmetric key, lower risk, and you just have to make sure some parameters are set correct, and you can still do symmetric key, even going forward with quantum computers. And this, of course, comes back to SNDL, with David Deutsch anticipated in his 1997 book that people would be storing information in this period of time before we have the ability to decrypt, store it now, and then decrypt it in a number of years when you have the ability to read that information. And you might say, well, is it valuable a number of years from now? Well, some information may not be valuable, such as your shopping list. A number of years from now, you may not care if your shopping list is public on the open internet, but there's a lot of information that you do not want to be revealed. Your healthcare data, even a number of years from now, you really don't want your healthcare data, your patient data from hospital or clinic, you don't want that on the public internet. And so we need to make sure we transition now to the new standards, because adversaries can grab that information today, store it, and then decrypt it and reveal it to the world, or blackmail you or ransomware you years later. And so 20 billion devices, all of our phones, all the laptops, the servers, need software upgrade. Good news is we don't have to get rid of the phones, but bad news is we have to upgrade the apps, the software. And so over the next years, as you start to use various apps with your bank, with your utility, with your telco, you'll get a message, please go back to the App Store and update it. And in that update, they will be swapping out RSA for the new post-quantum protocol. So most consumers might even know this is happening, but now, here at Oxford and online, you know what is going on. In the background, it'll be swapped for this. And there's a lot of investment in quantum by countries as well as companies because of this cyber threat. And what can we do about that? Well, we can have post-quantum cryptography, or PQC. We do not need quantum computers to counter quantum computers. This is software and algos run on today's classical devices, be it phones or be it laptops and servers. And NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technologies, has been coordinating with its counterpart here in the UK and 24 other countries over the last 6 years to determine, of the 82 candidates that were proposed to replace RSA, which ones shall we go with? And finally, just July 5th of this year, just a number of months ago, we got the answer. The answer is in the upper right box. I can use my fun. Ooh. Very satisfying, isn't it? So Crystal's Kyber is the lattice-based cryptography protocol that we, all of us here in this room, online, will be migrating to over the next number of years. Lattice-based cryptography, I'll talk about in just a minute. And then we have 3 DSAs, digital signature algorithms. So 1 key exchange and 3 digital signature algorithms, with a number for further analysis coming out. Cyc has been broken, so we will not be seeing Cyc in the near future. And lattice-based cryptography is a form of mathematics. It's a mathematical problem that has some of the same elegant characteristics that the RSA problem had, but without the factoring issue. RSA depended on the hardness of taking a large number and trying to find the 2 factors, but the easy aspect of taking 2 numbers and multiplying together to get a bit. So that asymmetric part of it is why RSA worked so well. It's a one-way trapdoor function. That's the kind of category of functions. And this happens to be another one-way trapdoor function. When we say one-way, it doesn't mean that it's impossible to go the other way. It's just computationally very, very difficult to go back. Billions and billions of years on the biggest supercomputers would not get you back. And this has the additional advantage that even time on a quantum computer would not get you to reverse the protocol unless you had the private key. So lattice-based cryptography is where we are going now, and in another lecture, perhaps in the future, we can explain the mathematics of that. And what we're doing is realizing that now is the time not just to migrate from RSA to post-quantum, but also to take a look at the cyber architectures we have at universities, at hospital with patient records, at companies. This is the time to relook at that. Everyone here has been seeing the news of breaches. Maybe you've had your own information breached at various companies, and it happens every single day. We need to take a look at why we're having all this and moving to new secure platforms. One final note in terms of other ways of doing quantum security. This is an alternate way than these algos I just mentioned before. This is quantum key distribution. China is very heavily focused on this, and there's also many European efforts in this area as well. And this uses a technique, one of the techniques is called BB84, after the two individuals who developed it, Bennett and Brassard, in 1984. And this is a method that's been proven to be unconditionally secure. So as opposed to conditional security, conditioned on the hardness of computation, this is unconditionally secure because it is guaranteed by the nature of quantum mechanics itself. And there's a large open QKD effort in Europe. I encourage folks to check into this. There's a lot of research going on, a lot of collaboration. You can get a master's degree in this area. Very, very interesting area to check into. And then I'll just close before I turn to Kelly with a few notes on this, that in addition to the computation, the sensing, the simulation, there's also ways to connect quantum devices together. As Nadia was saying before, one of the possibilities of the mid to far future is connecting quantum devices one to the other, not just via the classical network, TCP/IP, but also exchanging and sharing coherent states. And for that, you'll need a parallel internet that is now being built out. AWS has a center that they launched. QNet is a company based in New York City that we now have taken a small investment in. And there's other companies now building this out. And this is because we need quantum repeaters. The signal that goes down the fiber optic line needs repeating every 140 or so kilometers. You cannot just do it from here all the way across Europe. You need the ability to have quantum repeaters. And this parallel internet will mimic and will recapitulate the build out of the first internet. The way that we all built the first internet was node by node by node, and then they were all connected. Academia, the universities, and then corporations and governments, all connected up across the US, Europe, and then Asia. And you see here in the lower right-hand corner the initial nodes of a parallel quantum coherent network. This is a network that will now combine quantum sensors, quantum computers, other quantum devices on a coherent network. And there's many, many interesting use cases, including DQC, distributed quantum computing. If nothing else from this lecture, you get a lot of cool abbreviations that you can impress your friends with at cocktail. And so DQC, ask your friends what DQC is. They will not know, I guarantee that. And you can tell them all about it. So with that, let me now invite another member of our team, Kelly Richdale. Please, Kelly, welcome Kelly Richdale.
Thank you so much. A brief introduction. I'm actually from the business side. I used to run the quantum safe security division of the company ID Quantic, which makes quantum key distribution devices and quantum random number generators. And if you ever buy a phone from Samsung, if you buy the top of the line, you'll find one of the quantum random number generators now embedded in that telephone. The reason I mention that is because quantum technologies are multidisciplinary. You know this very well. It's absolutely critical that researchers and business collaborate together to move the science forward. There are a few things more beautiful than actually seeing embodied in a product or in reality the research that you have been working so hard on. With that in mind, we would like to invite you to Sandbox, to our educational residency program. We take interns. You can see some of the companies we work with, Deloitte, EY, and others. We have worked with 40 universities worldwide, including here Imperial College, Oxford, Cambridge, etc. I think if I press here, you can see this is typically a duration of 3 to 12 months. The good news is we met with a bunch of your professors earlier on, a couple of hours ago. They all think it's a great idea. And they say that you can take a break out of your master's or your PhD program to come and join us at Sandbox and to work on not necessarily the same topic that you've been working on in your thesis, more traditionally a different topic, but that will bring a fresh view on your thesis topic that will allow you to see other aspects of quantum, how it's applied in reality. We even have a case, I think it's the quantum sensing division, where we had a student who came, decided she wanted to write a thesis, and Jack set up an entire division around it afterwards. So we would invite you to come. Please do apply. We're looking for students with an interest in all of the following topics, and we would welcome you contacting us after this lecture, and we'll be around for drinks afterwards if you'd like to chat.
Great. So just to close out, thank you so much to my colleagues, Nadia, Kelly, and Stefan, for sharing in this presentation. And hopefully you got a sense now of a few key takeaways. First, quantum is not just about quantum computing. It is a much broader field. It's a fascinating field that brings in so many other disciplines. And one thing we encourage all the academic students that we work with is to think about taking courses in other departments. If you're a physics major, think about some computer science, think about chemistry, think about biology. If you're in the business field and you want to attack this from a business and marketing or product point of view, Kelly's a great example of somebody who became quite technical over the years that she was at IB Quantique and now with us as well, and you have a role to play. There's many, many ways, and one of the reasons why I wrote the book is as an on-ramp into this field. I was teaching quantum computing along with Stefan and others to Google engineers and then outside of Google, and we found that we really needed some on-ramp materials for people to get into this field from a lot of different other fields. And they also needed a hands-on way of understanding the concepts. And so the book really focuses on hands-on, very easy coding. You do not have to be a coder to check out the book. There's a free online GitHub website that has all the code. You can download it. It's in collabs, meaning hosted online environments. You don't have to set up anything in your computer, and you can check it out as well. So many universities now, including Oxford, using this textbook in various courses, but it's also a very good book for self-study at the same time. And one thing that the education division is doing at Sandbox AQ that Kelly mentioned is working with universities to set up even more courses at the undergraduate level as well. Too many of the quantum computing courses are at the graduate student level, and the other issue is there's not enough courses at all in quantum sensing, quantum communications, quantum simulation, and these other fields. And so we're really encouraging working on a pro bono basis with universities, including Oxford and others, to make sure we can bring this into the curriculum so that others can share in this new field. So AQ, AI, and quantum information sciences really defining the future in terms of how we will communicate with each other, the future in terms of how we develop drugs, how we develop new materials, battery chemistry, climate change. For anyone interested in working on combating climate change, these are critical tools for that fight. Medical applications, including not only drug discovery, but also, as Stefan was mentioning, medical imaging and diagnostics. The fact is we must democratize and push to the edge the kind of sensors. It is not scalable for the entire world to have large MRI machines that are expensive and in central hospitals. Billions of people around the world cannot access these expensive centralized devices. We need to have small devices that are room temperature, easy to use, easy to access, and we can push them across the world at the very edge of the healthcare network. So if you're interested in changing the world, if you're interested in impacting the world and working on these kinds of things, we encourage you to think about this field of AQ as we make this a reality. Thank you very much. We have 2 email addresses here if you're interested in contacting us. Please reach out to either Adam or Mariana. They have primary responsibility for engaging with students and universities. They're happy to have their inboxes flooded with your emails. And there's going to be a lot of interaction that we can have. Even if right now you're not ready for a residency program, perhaps in the near future. And also you may want different pro bono collateral from us in terms of courses and other online materials for learning that we offer. This QR code goes to the paper that we handed out here for those online or here. If you want the PDF version, the electronic version, please grab this QR code and that will go there. And there's also an email address that we have in the PDF as well for the corresponding author, David. But please also reach out to Adam and Mariana. I want to thank again Nathan and Mert and Vanch, where's Vanch? Here is it. And thank the entire Oxford Student Society for putting this together. And thank you. And I think as part of the thank you, I think we have pizza coming as well. So thank you very much, and great to see you. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Right, people have to go, that's fine. We'll stay around here for a bit to do some Q&A. I think there was one question that came in, Benji, from the online Zoom audience, and that is, do the quantum sensors only detect dynamic changing magnetic fields, or can just be static? It can be static, you don't have to have it changing necessarily, but it can also detect those changes. Another person has asked, Benji, something about when we have non-specialists using AutoML, that technology I was mentioning, and what are the implications of that? I think actually the implications are very positive overall. Yes, you do have to have some training, even as a non-specialist, to use AutoML, but this is far less training than coding up from scratch a bespoke model. And bespoke models, it turns out, now papers have been shown by Quackley and other leading researchers that the AutoML version, the neural architecture search, that automatically is searching a landscape of different model and hyperparameter solutions, actually beats the best of artisanal programming by the best experts in the field. So, sorry humans, one win for the machines there in terms of how we can create these. So, a very fascinating change in the field from artisanal, bespoke models to the more automated search. Any questions here from the audience? I know Steve Babbage is burning with a question. Okay, please, start here. Let me put you on mic. Say your name and
yeah, my name is Fabian, I'm here at postdoc. I was wondering, is there already an equivalent to what Shor's algorithm does to cryptography for AI? Like, if you had a quantum computer right now, you can run Shor's algorithm on it and break stuff. But could you do is there already anything that you could use for AI?
To break cryptography, or
No. I meant if you had a quantum computer that is working, could you run? Is there an AI algorithm that you could use?
Yeah. So what Fabian is pointing to is an emerging field called QML, quantum machine learning. It's a very, very fascinating field in terms of the question is, if you had a quantum computer, what are the implications of what it could do for the AI field, right? And I'll throw out one or two, and I'll call upon my colleagues here to think about other parts of this answer. One aspect is if you had a data set that is coming out of a quantum sensor coherently, that is, this is a data set coming out of quantum sensors. One way is you could turn it into classical information and then process it, of course, on a classical machine or a quantum machine. But a more interesting use case might be to actually keep it coherent and plug it directly into a quantum computer. And we're just at the beginning frontiers of understanding what that even means, and that's probably why we want quantum communication systems, because you may not have the sensor near the quantum computer. Quantum computers are a bit bulky right now, as Nadia showed us, and so you may have the quantum sensor in one place if you want to bring it over to the quantum computer for processing, and that obviously only a quantum computer can do a neural network based on coherent data coming in. The good news is we now have, due to a number of great papers by some researchers in the field, an understanding of how to instantiate a neural network with a quantum computer. It was not obvious at first, because let's recall, quantum computers have no hard drives, they have no compiler, they don't have the normal things. They don't have a bus architecture and ALU the way that we think of traditional, von Neumann-based architecture of computers. And so it was not obvious initially how to encode the training of a neural net into a quantum computer. The good news is several papers in the literature now give us that template, and one application is to bring coherent information directly into a quantum computer from, say, a sensor, as an example, and then process it. Stephanie, maybe you want to add to that, some ideas on QML?
Yeah, so I think certainly for quantum data and quantum processing of quantum data, we expect big advantages using a quantum computer. But there's also thinking into the far future of fault-tolerant quantum computation, even beyond Shor's algorithm level. There's an algorithm that has a lot of attention called the HHL algorithm named after its three inventors, Haro,
Haro, Hasidim, and Molloy.
And this is an algorithm. It's a linear algebra algorithm. So it solves systems of equations. And for certain kinds of linear algebra problems of very large size, it could give you some very significant advantage. And you can try and use that in like machine learning and AI contexts if you want. But the algorithms we have are like those kinds of things. It's about like basic building block kinds of algorithms, not full scale, I'm going to solve this AI problem using a quantum computer kind of algorithm.
One thing to note, it's a really good question, is that the future of computing as we see it, and I think shared by many, many in the field, is not quantum computers or classical computers. It's going to be a mesh hybrid where we have CPU, GPU, and QPU, quantum processing unit. And the main way I personally think about quantum computers is that it's almost a subroutine. Quantum computers are very, very good at very few things. And so for most things, we actually still want to run them on CPUs and GPUs, and more GPUs now because of the capabilities that I mentioned earlier. But there's some things that you want to subroutine out to a QPU and say, hello, QPU, this kind of thing, right? Simulating particular chemical interactions, whatnot. I want you to run that. Return to me an answer. And one of the interesting things about quantum computers is that when you do the measurement, the output is not quantum, it's not coherent, it is classical information, right? So when we actually make quantum circuits, quantum programs, we have a single line indicating coherent applications of operators, and then a double line if it's classical. And so when you do the measurement, it is classical information coming out. That classical information from the QPU subroutine can then be fed back into the GPU that has more of the traditional kind of compilers and interpreted language that we understand, how to write, Python, so on and so forth. And then we can continue with the application from there. So really, the coding of the future is going to be this hybridized coding, where part of it's running on a classical machine and part of it is running on a quantum machine. And more, here's a hint for the next lecture, maybe when we come back, is that more and more of the code will itself be written by AI. We talked about large language models, we talked about visual models, we talk about video models now. What is to stop AI from writing a lot of that code? And so my prediction to you is that in a number of years, maybe 10 plus years, when I say that I've written some code, you'll have the same reaction as if I told you that I just went out and did some horseback riding. You don't think I actually used a horse to get to a certain place for a destination. I did some nostalgic event called horseback riding, right? And the same will be with coding. You'll be like, Stefan, we did some coding. How nostalgic, right? We did some artisanal coding on a Saturday to remember the good old days when humans coded. And that'll be a fun thing to say. Other questions?
Yeah, can we take one from the chat?
Yeah, well the two ones from the chat, I did.
There are a few more from
Benji.
online. Yeah, so, okay, so one question we have is sort of related to what you said is, so if we have a quantum computer with, say, 1 million qubits, it's still very far off into the future, of course, can it compete with, say, a neural network with 500 billion neurons? If you could construct a quantum neural network in some sense.
Yes. So it's a very interesting question. Again, we have an issue of kind here, not scale, right? So when we think about what we can do in the classical world, it's hard to just put it directly into the quantum world. Quantum computers have particular properties that we can put these qubits in states of superposition, and then we can actually link 2 or more of the qubits in states of entanglement. And because of that, they have a different way of computing. It's not the same way. And so when we think about quantum computers, just as an example of the difference, when I add 1 more qubit to a quantum computer, let's say I went from 126 to 127 qubits, I am doubling the representational power in that particular computer. That would not be the case in the case of a traditional transistor-based classical computer. So we really want to really think about the apples and oranges nature of that interesting question. It's a fascinating question, and I'm glad people asked it, because it really does elucidate that we do not need the same number of nodes in a quantum computer to represent and have the same representational space as a classical computer. In fact, we have a chart, not in this deck, but maybe in another deck that we can combine with one day, showing the correspondence in representational power of just a handful of qubits compared to large numbers of transistors. I thought the question was going to be, can the people at home also get pizza? That's what I thought the question was. But, okay.
Yeah, okay. And one more. Someone says, I'm very interested in quantum-based healthcare technology, so could you please elaborate a bit more on your vision, SandboxAQ? on healthcare if we have quantum-based devices?
Yeah, so great question on quantum-based healthcare applications. I think it really ranges and will be absolutely transformative, both AI and quantum, but the two together in particular will be transformative to the way we do medicine and develop drugs. Drug development, as we mentioned earlier, is far too expensive, takes far too long, and we have far too many diseases and conditions that could be handled by today's very, very slow output. And the fact is that when you spend 2 billion pounds or euros and dollars, it's kind of becoming the same thing, then it is very disappointing, obviously, when you spend 2 billion of any kind of unit of currency, and then only to find out in the phase 2, phase 3 trial that it fails. And why does it fail? Well, sometimes it fails because the efficacy was not achieved. You have certain endpoints, as we say, in clinical trials, and it did not achieve the efficacy. It did not have the effect in a placebo-controlled trial, which is the gold standard. In other cases, it did have the efficacy, but the toxicity was too high. And so could we simulate the interaction of that molecular structure with the liver, with the kidney, with the heart, with other areas that we know to be the minefields of toxicity? That is, you can have a drug and it works in terms of its intended application, but then suddenly it causes inflammation of the heart, or it causes a kidney issue. And people have to stop taking that particular. There was a drug a number of years ago that was in the market, approved by the various authorities, CE mark, FDA, so on and so forth, and then had to be stopped 2 years in because it was actually causing diabetes. Obviously, they didn't make the drug to cause diabetes, but that's what happened with this particular antipsychotic. And so it had to be stopped. It could not be used anymore. Even though it did handle its initial job, it actually caused this toxicity. So could we simulate this? So that's one area that I think will be massively transformed by AQ technology, both AI and quantum working in concert in simulation. Second, in terms of diagnosis and imaging. The medical imaging world is due for a massive revolution. These devices are too big, too expensive, too inaccessible. And when we think about mobile technology, how that's transformed the world, the fact that there were 3.5 billion people only 6 years ago who had yet to access the internet ever in their lives. And now that's shrinking by about 300 million people per quarter. We're now down just to the final 1.5 billion folks who do not yet have access to a smartphone. And within a number of quarters from today, that will now be closed as well. As smartphones came down to under $20, that gap has now been closed. Think about what we can do with medical diagnosis if we can have the same kind of effect as mobile phones had, when we can bring down medical devices and medical diagnostic devices to small form factors, inexpensive, with low power draw that can be used with batteries or solar energy, and brought to the field in rural places and in countries around the world. We must go outside of the thinking of just being in a very, very advanced country such as the UK, US. We have to go beyond that thinking and say, how do we bring this kind of diagnostic capability to the rest of the world? And that's where I think we're going to see a major revolution as well. Any other questions from the audience here? Please, your name, question.
Hi, I'm Murray from Corpus Christi College. I can see that there's a question about the residency program, so I thought I would ask one of my questions.
Yeah, please.
Which is also related to that. I wonder if you could please elaborate slightly on the residency program. Is it a paid residency? I can see the question there is asking also, is there only students from partner universities that can apply? And what is the application process like?
Great. Great questions from Marion and from online. So first of all, you can apply from any university. You do not have to have a special partnership with the university for you to apply to the residency. It's also, I should mention, a running thing all throughout the year, so there's not a special time to apply. It's a rolling application process. When you go to our website, there's an application right there. You click on it. It takes about 5-6 minutes to fill out the information, and the application process is started. So we encourage folks to do that. It's throughout the year. It is a paid residency, so there's a stipend, quite a generous one, I think, that is involved in this. And so we're supporting the students through the process of the residency, and we provide not only a very interesting project, either that you suggest. You don't have to work on what we do. You can actually suggest a product. And I think, as Kelly mentioned before, one of our residents came in and said, I would like to work on quantum sensing, and started out a whole new project of ours that now is the basis of one of our key quantum sensing projects. So really big impact that you can have coming into this kind of program. Students typically, if they're working on a thesis at master's, PhD, or other levels, they typically put a pause on that for the moment and start working on a fresh set of ideas, and then pick up back where they left off when they come back to university. I should also mention that this can be done virtually in the whole world, so you don't have to travel anywhere if you don't want to. You're welcome to come to one of our many locations. We're here in the UK, we're in France, we're in Austria, we're in the US, we're in Canada. So there are physical locations you can come to if you'd like to do that. We have experimental photonics and sensing in our Palo Alto location. So if you are getting down about the rain here in England, you can come to Palo Alto, where it's 72, let's see, what is that, 19 Celsius every single day of the year, and pretty nice weather. And so you can come out and do that with us there, but you can also do it remotely. And we actually were doing before COVID. But now, certainly with COVID, if you want to do it right here from Oxford, that is absolutely fine. Or for those seeing us online, wherever you are in the world, we've had residents now from many, many countries and continents throughout the world. So we do support that virtual world as well. That hopefully answers. Good answer. Good. Question over here.
Hi, my name is Lucas. I'm a first year in computer science and philosophy. I recently attended a lecture about quantum entanglement and action at a distance, and I was just wondering, are those ideas being applied practically in the engineering side of things now, or is that yet to come?
Yeah. Great question.
Yeah, entanglement. Please repeat the question.
Yeah. Great question about entanglement and action at a distance. I'm a little spooky action at a distance, and maybe I'll turn to Nadia and Stefan to talk about how, yes, we are using this in computing and other applications.
Thank you. Yeah, so you absolutely use both superposition and entanglement when you do quantum computing, as well as some types of quantum sensing. Anytime you're doing a qubit gate, for example, in quantum computing, you're using entanglement. It would be impossible to do that without it. The way you can trigger entanglement, the way you can actually get qubits in superposition can be different depending on the type of quantum computer that you're using. But it's absolutely not science fiction. It's just something that is very much observable as well as usable today.
Yes, go ahead, please. Yeah, so I'll just add just a couple things. You could say that the kind of modern new quantum technologies that are coming out and will be coming out over the next 10 years, kind of the theme there compared to like the quantum technologies of the old days is an increasing use of the power of entanglement and an increase in our ability to create it and use it as a resource. It's also, I think, worth noting that really confirming so this sort of spooky action at a distance type stuff was the rewarded just a few weeks ago with the Nobel Prize in Physics. Some very, very key experiments demonstrating that these effects are very good.
Great. And what's interesting is that there was a paper in 1935 known as EPR. Any thoughts on who EPR was? You can look it up. It's okay. EPR. The E is who? Einstein. The P. Podolsky. R. Rosen. Okay, so EPR paper 1935, and what EPR said is, hey, you quantum people. Now, this is ironic because Einstein, 1905, in his paper on what effect? Photoelectric effect. Excellent. Very well-read audience here. The photoelectric effect is the paper that followed on Max Planck's paper, right? And was inspired by Max Planck. He actually gave homage to Max Planck's paper in 1905, and then put another foundation stone in quantum mechanics. So ironically, the same Einstein who did that, now by 1935, is really pissed off about quantum mechanics. He's not happy with the spooky action distance. In German, it's even a more funny word. If someone wants to look it up and read it to us, it's a really great word in German. You gotta love it. Yeah, let's hear it. Let's hear it on the microphone. It's a fantastic word. I love this word. Please, go ahead. Excellent. You gotta love it. And in 1935, they wrote this paper as an attack against the edifice of quantum mechanics. Like, if what you say is true, then it should be able to true that you can entangle two particles and take them at large distances, and they'll be still correlated in this special way that we now know. And they meant it as an attack to break down quantum mechanics, because Einstein, we have the blackboard that he worked on in 1955, the year he died, in Princeton at the Institute for Advanced Study, and he was still working on a theory that said, no, there's actually a deterministic way of understanding this whole ballgame. We're missing something here. It's not what he said in the 1920s in a letter he wrote to Erwin Schrödinger, is that quantum mechanics, although useful, cannot be the ultimate solution of physics. And to the day he died, he was trying to find an alternative. We now know through John S. Bell in the 60s, when he was at CERN, he put forward his particular paper, and then, as Stefan just mentioned, the Nobel Prize just given for physics to 3 individuals who actually courageously then went into experimentally verify what John S. Bell put forward. And I say courageously because John Clauser, for example, the first of the 3 to actually do experimental verification, lost his job as a physicist, an academic physicist, because he pursued this. And so it's a lesson to us to understand that as we're pursuing science, sometimes even scientists can make errors of judgment in terms of marginalizing ideas that may not be mainstream at the time. And if you actually look at the Nobel Prize declaration just 2 weeks ago, you'll see that 2 of the individuals are associated with well-known universities. John Clauser says, J.A. Clauser and Associates, Woodside, California, because for decades he could not get a job because he pursued the question of the fundamentals of quantum mechanics, which was not in vogue back 3+ decades ago when he did his work. So this is very much at the heart now, not only of the theory of quantum mechanics, but now in the practical use that we have today. So great question, thank you. Other questions, please. Name?
I'm Tom, first year deep in physics. Well, thank you very much for the talk. I was just wondering, you briefly mentioned the AI winter. I was wondering with the great leaps we made in quantum hardware these days, do you think we're due for quantum winters?
Yeah. So great question about quantum winter. Let me turn to some of my colleagues. I have some thoughts as well, but is there a chance of backlash due to overhype of the quantum technologies? Who would like to field this question? Kelly?
I'd actually love to. Whereas maybe some of you even attended the event, there was a quantum event in London a couple of weeks ago. And this is public information. MasterCard gave a talk on how they're using quantum. And they're already using quantum. They're not waiting for error correcting codes to come along in the perfect quantum computer. They're already using quantum to run simulations on Forex exchange. So they have actually mapped this on today's noisy quantum that Nadia talked about, the NIST computers. They've mapped it as a traveling salesman problem that will optimize the shortest distance between 2 Forex transactions in order to be able to figure out how they can optimize their financial benefit based on the outputs of these noisy quantum computers. And they're already finding ways to make this beneficial and to bring an ROI. They already have an ROI in mind. So I think there will be challenges in financing, as we see. There's going to be some difficult financial times ahead. We were told by our financial investors, this is not an issue for Sandbox at all, but if you're doing a startup, raise money early and spend slowly. Raise as much as you can, spend slowly. But this is really the start of quantum. This is not, there will be applications, real applications that are already being used today. And I just wanted to share that because to me it was mind-blowing that the applications on quantum computers are already out there. And I'll pass it to Nadia, I think, or Jack wanted to.
Yeah, I guess I'll just add a couple of things to that. As Kelly mentioned, the applications are real, and because of that, it's very unlikely that all investment is going to dry up. I think that just doesn't make sense. One of the biggest dangers in quantum right now, I think, is hype around the field, which can go both ways. It can spur a lot of investment, but it can also be very disappointing when things don't happen on the timelines that people expect. So I think being very realistic as a community and being able to talk about the research and development in a way that's very factual is going to be key to make sure that we avoid a quantum winter. And most of the community is doing pretty well at that. And I think at Sandbox, we're definitely trying to make sure that we're educating customers, we're educating the community to make sure that we are very optimistic about the potential for quantum technologies, but at the same time, we're very realistic about where the technology is right now, and we're trying to improve it as opposed to hyping up the applications that are not feasible today. So it's a good balance, and I think that will help us avoid some of the mistakes that were done in AI.
Thank you, Heather, very much. And thank you, Kelly, for that. Before we move ahead, I just want to recognize someone in the audience that we've collaborated with. Steve Babbage is here. Thank you, Steve. And Steve is a master and expert cryptographer, somebody who is deeply ensconced in the field and was lead and head of all cryptography at Vodafone for many decades until very recently when he decided, I think, to move on to more lofty passages. And Steve was one of the first in the cryptography community to understand and recognize the quantum threat and what we needed to do about it, and the hardening of our cryptography and encryption cyber architectures to understand how do we have secure networks of the future, how do we take our VPNs, virtual private networks, which they are based on the vulnerable technologies, and upgrade those to the new kinds of post-quantum protocols. So, Steve, I don't know if you want to make a comment at all just about the field and how you see it. If you want to maybe just take the microphone and make more comment, please. Steve?
Thank you, Jack, for very generous introduction. So, I guess I'll say that we've been talking about, and many of you will have studied the need for post-quantum cryptography in a slightly sort of academic perspective, but do not underestimate the practical challenges for, think of a huge company like Vodafone, which has massive IT systems, massive telecom systems, crypto embedded in them all over the place. For a company like that, knowing what it has to do ultimately, where it has to be in, I don't know, five years, say, of completely, at least phasing in the use of post-quantum cryptography right across that, but where the heck do you start? It's a really, I mean, you probably don't even know everywhere you have cryptography in your IT and telecoms world. So I'm very pleased to know that Sandbox are not just working on, say, the implementation of algorithms, but really practical tools to help big and small companies take those steps, do this inventory, do the first planning stages. But it's way bigger than a sort of mathematical exercise.
Thank you, Steve, very much. Anyway, let's wrap up because the pizza is now coming. And thank you so much for joining us here in person. Thanks to the Zoom audience. Thanks to Nathan, to Mert, to Vanch, to Benji, to all the organizers here at the Society and the Association of the Students. You guys have done an incredible job bringing this together. I think, as you mentioned, I guess this is the record number of participating in person and online. And so I think that demonstrates the interest in the frontier, in how we bring AI and quantum together. And the most important takeaway is that this is how you can impact the world. This is not just about technology or about an academic subject, as Steve was mentioning and my colleagues were mentioning as well. This is a way to have massive impact on our world in the near term, midterm, and in the long term. Please help me also thank Stefan, Kelly, and Nadia for their participation as well. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
5 minutes for the pizza.
Well, okay, yeah, I just want to ask a quick question. So, everyone here received an invite of some sort. Who received an email, our newsletter, from this email address and then came here? Okay. Who received an email from a meetup group? Okay. Who received an email from some internal department at Oxford? Good, okay. Word of mouth? Here we go. Am I missing anything? Please shout out.
TikTok?
Quantum sensing?
We're very big on TikTok.
Sensing, Pressure Square. Okay, great. And who has? Okay, I'm not gonna ask. I was gonna ask who hasn't signed up and just showed up, but that's fine. Okay, yeah, thanks.
And then we have the 30 signed books of the first 30 people who gave their name to one of the student organizers here. So we have those
Yeah,
there.
we have the books here. We have your
Yeah.
names.
So if you one of the first 30 people you gave your name to the organizers, please come up and get the signed book.
Yeah. Again, thanks to the Sandbox team. Thanks to everyone at Quantum Information Society.
5 minutes for the pizza, please.
5 minutes for the pizza. We can talk outside of it. Thanks to bunch. Who's here? Niceto, Gediminas, Simone, Leah, and please, if you have any questions about society, email me. We're looking for new officers and new members. Thank you.